He bullied me for years. Then I took everything from him. From bully to husband to enemy welcome. Back with a new real shock story. Before we start, comment and tell me which city you're watching from. A to the end. Don't forget to subscribe and rate it from 0 to 10. Let's enjoy the story, everyone. I never planned to tell this story. For years I kept it buried, like something too heavy to look at. But memories have a strange way of breathing on their own. You think they're gone until one quiet night, they whisper back to life. Mine begins in the hallways of my old high school, the place where I first learned how cruel people could be when the right audience was watching. Back then, I was quiet. Not shy, exactly. Just careful. I liked sketching faces in the margins of my notebooks, listening to songs that made me feel understood. Most days I tried to disappear into the background, but disappearing never worked with him around. His name doesn't matter now. I've said it enough times in my head. He was the kind of boy who filled every room with noise. Teachers liked him, friends followed him, and somehow that made him believe he could decide who mattered and who didn't. I became the easy target, maybe because I never talked back. Maybe because I wore the same sweater too often. It started small, jokes whispered just loud enough for me to hear. Books knocked from my hands, laughter that followed me down the hallway. The worst part wasn't what he did it, was how everyone else watched and said nothing. I used to tell myself it would fade, that one day he'd get bored, but every week the teasing grew sharper, like he needed to prove something. One winter morning, he tripped me in front of the cafeteria line. The whole room burst into laughter, even the people I thought were friends. I remember the sound more than the fall, how it echoed inside me. I wanted to vanish. Instead, I picked up my tray and kept walking. Pretending not to care was the only shield I had left. That year taught me how silence can bruise, how you can carry invisible scars that never make a sound. My grades slipped, my drawings changed. They became darker, angrier. My mom noticed, but I told her I was fine. What could she do? How do you explain that the world inside school feels like a storm you can't escape? When graduation finally came, I thought freedom would taste sweet. But pain doesn't vanish at the edge of a stage, it follows quietly. I moved to another city, got a small apartment, started working in a design studio. Life felt steady again, almost peaceful. I learned how to smile in pictures, how to laugh at work parties, how to pretend that high school was just a chapter closed. And for a while, I believed it. Then one ordinary afternoon, I walked into a coffee shop near the office, balancing my laptop and a sketch pad. I heard a voice familiar, careless, confident. When I turned, my heart stopped. It was him. The years had changed his face, but not the grin. He looked successful, polished, like the world had forgiven him for everything I still remembered. He recognized me instantly. "Alec?" he said, like we were old friends. My throat tightened, but I managed to smile. I told myself I'd stay calm, that I wouldn't let the past shake me. But inside, 1,000 old feelings crashed all at once. Fear, anger, disbelief. He asked how I'd been, told me he was working nearby, that life had been crazy. I nodded, polite, detached. Yet when he asked if we could catch up sometime, I hesitated, and then, for reasons I still don't fully understand, I agreed. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the need to prove that he no longer had any power over me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking of how easily he had smiled, as if none of it ever happened. Part of me wondered if he even remembered what he'd done. Another part hoped he did, because forgetting would be too easy. A week later, we met for lunch. The conversation felt strange, almost rehearsed. He spoke about his job, his travels, his growth. He told me he'd changed, that he wasn't that person anymore. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to think people could transform. So I listened. When we parted, he hugged me. I froze. It was quick, harmless on the surface, but to me it felt like touching the past itself. After that, he started messaging often, small talk turning into long late-night conversations. Against my better judgment, I answered. He was charming, thoughtful even. Slowly, the walls I had built began to crack. Friends said I seemed lighter, happier. Maybe I was. Or maybe I was just rewriting history in my head, turning a villain into someone human. Looking back now, I realize that moment in the coffee shop wasn't coincidence. It was the universe testing whether the wounds I'd buried had truly healed. They hadn't. Because sometimes the past doesn't knock, it walks right back into your life, smiling as if it belongs there. And that's exactly how everything began again. When I said everything began again, I didn't mean the cruelty returned in the same way. It was subtler this time, soft words, careful smiles, the kind of attention that makes you wonder if maybe the past has been rewritten. At first, I told myself this was closure. We were adults now. Maybe two broken versions of ourselves could make peace. We started meeting for coffee, sharing stories of work and life. He asked about my art, about the sketches I used to hide. I showed him a few pieces, and he said they were beautiful. For a second, I almost believed he saw me differently. I didn't realize he was looking for a reflection of himself in my forgiveness. Weeks went by, then something shifted. He began reminding me of who I used to be, the quiet girl who never spoke up. Little comments slipped through, "You still overthink everything," or "You've always been too sensitive." Harmless on the surface, but heavy if you know the history behind them. One evening, after another coffee that tasted more like regret than comfort, I went home and looked at an old sketchbook from high school. Between the drawings were notes, small sentences I had written to survive the worst days. "Keep walking. It won't always hurt. You are not what he says you are." Reading those words felt like finding a letter from someone brave I used to know. I realized she had waited all these years for me to listen. The next day, I called him and said we needed to talk. We met in the same cafe where it had all restarted. I told him, calmly, that I remembered everything. The laughter, the whispers, the loneliness. I wasn't angry, I just wanted him to know that what he did mattered, that it left marks that never completely fade. He looked away, silent. For the first time, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. Maybe guilt, maybe confusion. It didn't matter. What mattered was that I finally spoke the words that had lived in my throat for years. After that day, I didn't hear from him again. I thought closure would come like thunder, but it arrived quietly. Some nights, the memories still stung, but they no longer owned me. I started drawing again, new lines, lighter shades. I began volunteering at a youth center, teaching kids how to express themselves through art. Seeing them find their voices reminded me of how powerful a single word can be, how silence breaks when courage finally speaks. Healing didn't happen all at once. It came in small moments. Morning walks, laughter with new friends, forgiving myself for ever thinking I was weak. Looking back now, I understand that meeting him again wasn't a curse. It was a mirror. It showed me how far I had come, how much I had grown. The past didn't disappear, but it no longer defined me. Sometimes, life circles back to the people who once hurt us, not to reopen the wound, but to prove that it's finally healed. And for me, that moment was the quiet beginning of peace. After that final meeting, the world didn't suddenly brighten. Healing never feels like a movie, ending it slower, quieter. For weeks I woke up expecting an apology message, a knock on my door, some dramatic closure. It never came. What arrived instead was silence, and in that silence I started to hear myself again. I threw myself into my work at the studio. I took on small design projects, stayed late, drank too much coffee. Each drawing became a small confession, anger sketched into shadows, hope hidden in color. My coworkers noticed that something in my style had changed. "There's movement in your art now," one of them said. I smiled because she didn't know how literal that was. It was me finally moving forward. But moving on doesn't mean the past stops testing you. One morning, my manager asked if I could help with a charity exhibition. They were partnering with local entrepreneurs. When I saw the list of names, my breath caught. His company was a sponsor. For a moment, panic fluttered through me. Then a strange calm followed. Maybe this was life's way of asking me, "Are you really ready to stand tall?" The night of the event, the room glittered with lights and soft music. I wore a simple black dress and carried one of my favorite pieces, a drawing of a girl standing in a storm, her face half hidden but unbroken. People moved through the gallery, stopping to study it. I stood nearby, quiet, watching their reactions. Then I saw him walk in. Older, more polished, surrounded by people shaking his hand. He didn't see me at first, but when he did, he froze. For a second, we just stared at each other. Two versions of the past colliding in a room full of strangers. I thought I'd feel fear, but instead I felt compassion. Not for what he had done, but for how small he suddenly looked under the bright lights. He approached slowly, almost hesitant. "Your work is beautiful," he said. His voice sounded different, careful. I thanked him and turned back to the painting. There was nothing left to say. I wasn't there for revenge or forgiveness. I was there to live. Later that night, one of the organizers asked me to speak about the piece. My hands shook as I stepped up to the microphone. I could see faces in the crowd, expectant and kind. I took a breath and told them that the drawing came from a time when I felt invisible, when words were used to wound instead of build. I told them art saved me, that creating something honest can sometimes heal what people break. When I finished, the room was silent for a heartbeat, then filled with applause. I saw him clap too, eyes lowered. That was the last time I ever saw him. After the exhibition, messages poured in, people saying the story behind my work gave them courage to speak up about their own scars. Reading their words, I realized something powerful. The moment I shared my pain, it stopped owning me. The next weeks felt lighter. I started painting every morning before work, not for anyone else, but because I could. I met new friends, started hiking on weekends, learned how laughter sounds when it's real. Every day, the past seemed to fade a little more into something I could look at without flinching. Sometimes I still think about the girl I was, back then, the one counting trees from the bus window, hoping the world would stop noticing her. I wish I could tell her that she'd grow into someone unafraid to take up space. Because the truth is, life didn't hand me peace. I built it, brushstroke by brushstroke, choice by choice. And standing in that gallery, I finally understood. Surviving wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of who I was always meant to be. After the exhibition, I kept thinking about all the messages people had sent me. Some were just a few lines. Your story felt like mine. I wish I could be that brave. But each one stayed with me. I realized that if a single painting and a few honest words could make someone feel less alone, maybe this was what I was meant to do. So I started visiting the youth center more often. It began with a weekend art class, just a handful of kids who wanted to learn how to mix colors and shade faces. But art time turned into talk time. They'd draw, and stories would spill out: the quiet boy who felt invisible in class, the girl afraid to show her writing because people laughed. I listened. Sometimes all they needed was someone to hear them without judgment. One afternoon, a shy 12-year-old named Mia brought me a picture she'd drawn of herself standing on a hill under storm clouds. She said, "It's me, but stronger." I looked at her and saw a reflection of myself years ago, holding on through the noise. That moment sealed it for me. Healing isn't something you hide once you find it. It's something you hand to the next person who needs it. I began sharing short talks about art and resilience at local schools, telling students that creativity could be armor and medicine at the same time. Each time I spoke, I felt the old fear loosen its grip a little more. The story that once embarrassed me became a bridge to others. Still, there were days when the past crept back. A smell, a hallway, a careless joke, small reminders that scars don't vanish. They just stop bleeding. On those days, I painted late into the night. Colors have a way of translating what words can't. Blue for sadness that still lingers, gold for the peace that keeps returning. A few months later, the youth center asked me to lead a mural project. The wall was huge and blank, a challenge and a promise. I gathered a group of teens and asked what they wanted it to say. Their ideas poured out strength, kindness, belonging. Together we painted a scene of a girl standing beneath a storm that slowly turned into light. When we finished, everyone stepped back, covered in paint, laughing. Looking at that wall, I felt something shift inside me again. The story that started in pain now lived as color on brick, out in the open, touched by dozens of hands. It was no longer just mine. One evening after class, I sat alone in the empty room. The sunset filtered through the windows, painting the floor orange and gold. I thought about how far life had carried me from those high school hallways. I wasn't the frightened girl anymore, or even the young woman searching for closure. I was someone learning how to build light out of darkness. And that's when I understood something simple but true. Healing doesn't erase the past, it teaches you how to hold it differently. It's strange how life loops back on itself. When I started telling this story, I thought it was about what he did to me, about pain, or maybe about revenge. But sitting here now, years later, I see it was always about something else. It was about learning how to live again, how to let the past teach me without letting it trap me. I still visit the mural sometimes. The paint has faded a little under the sun, but the girl in the storm still stands tall. People walk by and don't know the story behind it. They just see color, movement, hope. I like that. It means the art has outgrown me. Every once in a while, I'll get a message from someone who found one of my talks online. They'll write, "Your story helped me tell mine." Those words never stop humbling me. They remind me that healing travels quietly, from person to person, until it becomes something larger than any single voice. I also learned that forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about refusing to carry their shadow any longer. When I think of him now, there's no hate left, just distance. I hope he learned something too. But his growth is his journey, not my responsibility. Mine was to turn what once broke me into something that could build others. The biggest surprise was realizing that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the steady breath you take before you speak the truth. Sometimes it's the decision to try again when no one is watching. Sometimes it's the moment you look at an old scar and think, I made it through that. If you had told the girl I used to be that one day, she'd be telling her story to strangers and calling it art. She wouldn't have believed you. She would have hidden her face, afraid of laughter. But life has a way of transforming fear into a voice if you keep showing up. I'm still learning, still painting, still building small pieces of peace wherever I can. Some days the memories sting, but most days they remind me of how far I've come. So if someone out there is listening, someone who feels invisible or broken or stuck inside a storm, this is what I want to tell you. Storms pass. They always do. And when the clouds lift, you'll see the colors you never noticed before. That's what happened to me. My story didn't end in revenge or even in sorrow. It ended in a room full of light, with paint on my hands and a future wide open. Because survival isn't the final chapter, it's just the beginning of everything beautiful that comes next.